Hey everybody, welcome back to the sanctuary. Saul here. It's a beautiful summer day, not too hot, not too cold. The bald eagles are out, all kinds of songbirds. So, wanted to make a video about something that came across my news feed. It's actually I saw it was being put out there by the Portland Audubon Society, and it's in regards to Oregon House Bill 3167. And what that basically does is it continues the process of what they call predator controlled districts, which raises funds and provides that to the U.S. Department of Agriculture Wildlife Services. And what they do is they deal with, I guess, what is termed nuisance animals. And I'm sure they actually have a wide range of services that they provide under different circumstances. But I wanted to just say I'm a little bit apprehensive about making a video on this topic just because that you have the classic urban-rural divide, in an issue like this where you have urban folks who are environmentalists and, they're making decisions for people in the country. You've got, people in the city, at least around here, definitely tend to lean more to the left. People in the country tend to lean more to the right. And so you just have all these classic American natural resource conflict variables going on in an issue like this where, the people in the country feel like they have certain needs and services that they need, and then you have kind of the morals and opinions and science a lot of times, because a lot of these policy decisions about what happens in the country come from wildlife biologists and agencies that exist, in many respects in the cities, within institutions. And so it's just kind of everything about it is, I want people to understand that I'm not particularly advocating. I am an advocate for the humane treatment of animals, of course, especially as a granger. But I'm not here to be a mouthpiece for Portland Audubon. I mean, they've got their partisan politics, and I'm not trying to, again, be a mouthpiece for them or anybody. But I'm just trying to kind of lay out exactly what's going on with this situation. So, they're pushing this to where they don't want this bill to pass because they don't appreciate wildlife services, and they view these killings as indiscriminate. And again, like I say, as I was just saying, people in the country may not view those killings as indiscriminate. They may, genuinely be terrified of a cougar around their children's school or something that's taking their livelihood away, and so this is not a black and white issue on any side. Again, that's kind of all I'm trying to say, and I don't want anybody to make that mistake of think that I'm oversimplifying any of these issues. They're complicated, and they definitely impact Sasquatch, which is, of course, why we're all here. But let me just say that it's, one of the things that I do that's different on the Patreon in particular and here is that I'm not a Sasquatch person that's here to prove their existence. I'm not all about just, documenting evidence and gathering all these things. Like, what I'm trying to do is, in a sense, a thought experiment. Let's just assume that, what all these, scientists and researchers that have come before us have said is true, which is that there is some form of great ape that lives here in North America. How does that apply to, natural resource management, the sciences, the study of human evolution? How does that change all these different things? Because our interaction with these creatures over a long period of time obviously has huge implications for where we've come from and where we're going and how we manage the land. And so when you have groups like Wildlife Services that make these massive changes to ecosystems, that's something that definitely we have to take into account with Sasquatch. So let me give just kind of one example. I have an active campground that I manage by the river, and one of the main draws that we have for customers is wildlife viewing. Now, when we first came out here almost 10 years ago, we had a lot of double-crested cormorant. Some of my first pictures that I took out here were of them because they would just be huge flocks of them coming through. And then over the course of, I think it's probably about the last 5 years, there's been all sorts of attempts to get them off of East Sand Island in the Columbia River. And there's been, again, like I set up earlier in the video, the sort of urban-rural divide, and in this case, it's you have the fishermen, who are concerned about it because they don't like the cormorant eating the salmon, of course. So what they did was, well, the East Sand Island actually it's an artificial island. A lot of the islands out on the Columbia are artificial, and then all these birds came in and they're eating, fish, and so they kind of become a target for the federal agencies, because the federal agencies are tasked, of course, with, trying to keep the salmon numbers up. And so you wind up having like all these battles within these various levels of federal and state agencies, trying to figure out what to do. It's incredibly complex. And then, of course, you throw in the nonprofits from the cities and, all kinds of lawyers. And, and so what they did was they came out and they started culling all these birds. And what they kind of figured out after a while, like I said, we saw the numbers drop where, yeah, we still have double-crested cormorant, but it's not like it was. But despite all the effort that they put into this, one of the effects, I remember reading it in the paper at the time, was that they actually moved the cormorant that survived to a different area, and those cormorant wound up eating more salmon, which totally nullified the effect of killing all these thousands of cormorant in the first place, because the survivors just ate more. I've read other stuff where they're saying, it doesn't really matter because you take the cormorant away and other predators come and eat the fish, and so you're just kind of killing the cormorant just to kill them. And so that's something that, I've seen personally out here. It's one of the things that comes out of, since the 1970s, when we first established real environmental laws and bureaucracies in this country. We have found out over time, obviously, like how difficult it is to control these systems. It's not a simple matter. And, so we have these conflicts where we've got one species that's protected consuming another species that's protected, and all sorts of different factors that go into the fluctuation of all these different populations. Some of them in our control, others not. And there's really, it's not like we can just step back and there's no return to normal, natural. I mean, all of our environments in the United States are so incredibly, altered and managed already that, unfortunately, we kind of have to keep going with this. So that's just kind of like a small one that I've noticed here, and then you kind of extrapolate that out over the entire country, that you have all these agencies who are trying to figure out how to balance all these different creatures and environmental laws and pressures so that we can have farms and so that we can have, all these different natural resource products that we need. And it just becomes incredibly complicated. Now, I'd never really heard of Wildlife Services before. I mean, I'm sure I've seen their name referenced, but I didn't quite realize that they were a target of environmental and animal rights groups. And so I did kind of take a look at it a little bit more. And, again, this is one of those things where I don't want to make it seem like I'm preaching to people or anything like that, but it does seem like Wildlife Services deserves some criticisms at the very least. There's one video that I watch, and I'll post it on the Patreon. And it starts with "exposed," in big letters, and so take that for what it's worth. But I did go through the video, and they were interviewing people that are predator trappers and all this kind of stuff, and so that's why I took it a little bit more seriously, I guess, is because these are people that do this stuff for a living, and they've worked with Wildlife Services, and from what they're saying, this agency can be a little bit indiscriminate and inhumane, and they could be killing a lot more organisms than we even realize, if what these individuals are saying is true, of course. But it's just, and it's kind of a depressing video to watch. Like I say, I'm not, I don't like thinking about like all these creatures, indiscriminately being destroyed and whatever. But it's important for the Sasquatch issue because, and again, I'll post a link to the actual wildlife service. Because they're a public agency, they have to list, what they've killed, how many, or at least estimates and whatever. And when you look at this list and you think about it, like how radically altered Bigfoot's ways are just by this one agency. The original thing about 3167, they had these quotes in there. Okay, this many bear, this many cougars, this many coyote. It, in some ways, in some environments, we might actually be helping Sasquatch by taking out their direct competitors. Cougars eat deer, Sasquatch eat deer, bears are heavy foragers, Sasquatch are heavy foragers. And in other instances, we might be taking out Sasquatch prey. And so it's like anyways, it's just kind of eye-opening. I had never paid that much attention to wildlife services in the past. I knew about these callings and stuff because it's, impacted me. And again, there's lots of times because we have these altered environments, it's a horrible truth. Nature, when you live out here, you realize like nature is a pretty cruel place. Even trees are like constantly trying to kill their tree neighbors. You see it all the time in the forest. Trees are just like always trying to like inch up and like just get that little bit more sunshine than this one, and then pretty soon this tree's dead. And the world is a cruel place, unfortunately, and I'm not trying to be flippant by that, but if we want to save certain creatures, then yes, sometimes we have to call the populations of these other creatures. But then there are these sort of unintended consequences, and so I think this is going to be one of the interesting things once Sasquatch is fully established as a real creature. This is all going to go into developing whatever protections for Sasquatch. We're going to have these sort of debates about, I don't know. Could we wind up in a situation to where the state mandates that we kill a certain number of bears and cougars because we've said that that's Sasquatch habitat and their numbers are so low that we need to get rid of their competitors? Because like I say, we definitely do that. That's a big part of what's on this list is, we're controlling creatures to try to like help other creatures, including ourselves, of course. So, it's a definitely a complicated deal. And one last thing I would kind of like to mention is, and I also just kind of randomly came across this on a news feed, but they're talking about the Four Pests campaign, which was part of the Great Leap Forward in China in the 60s. And China, especially through the Civil War and everything, and the period directly after, had all sorts of public health issues, and that was one of Mao's things, was they were going to combat all of these menacing public health issues. And so hey, okay, get rid of mosquitoes, that makes sense, get rid of rats. But one of the things that they did was they went after sparrows because they thought the sparrows were eating too much of their food. And what wound up happening was they killed, like, it's estimated, I guess, like 1 billion sparrows. And then all these locusts moved in, and it's like horrible things came from that. Absolutely horrible things. That fed into, one of the greatest modern famines, and just the horrors that were associated with that. And so when we make these massive changes to our environment, there are oftentimes things that we don't intend to happen. And so whether it's something as apocalyptic and awful and just horrible as what happened in China, or on a smaller example here with the cormorant, these things are happening over and over again as we try to figure out how to deal with our environment and to have healthy ecosystems but still continue on with what we do with our lives. you know, it's very complicated. So I just wanted to kind of like give a little bit of insight into that, and it's an interesting thing. And I guess we'll see where it goes in the Oregon legislature. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, everybody.